discussing about what a profile contains. So we can think it as just a template that contains configuration about all these things which are required for a server to start up, right? So whenever you start up a server, it loads all the thread pools, it loads all the subsystems, it loads the security settings. So everything it gets from the template. So which template? Based on the type of profile you have defined, right? So these profiles are directly applied to the server group in a domain mode. It is not applied to the server directly. So in standalone mode, there is no shared profile. So what is a shared profile? So if it is applied to a server group, then it is a shared configuration and a shared profile. But if it is a standalone mode, there is no shared profile. The server uses its own standalone based on what type of standalone server you want to start up. You have standalone default, standalone HA, standalone full HA. So whatever you want, you can start in standalone mode. So default, full HA, full HA. So these are the four commonly used in domain mode. So default, it is lightweight profile with core services suitable for non-clustered applications. So what are core services? Core services undertow thread pools, deployments, security settings, logging, data sources. These all are these all are core services for any type of profile, right? So if you want to use full profile, so why you want to use full profile? If you are deploying enterprise applications that needs JMS connection, that needs batch, etc. So all it totally depends upon the type of applications you are going to deploy, right? So if you are deploying enterprise edition full features, then you will use full profile. And HA, high availability, so it adds clustering capabilities. For session management, it will add infinite span, right? Session replication, session management, and application caching for better performance. J groups. This is for J groups is used in the clustering. The cluster members communicate with each other. And mod cluster, yes, mod cluster just like mod JK. Mod cluster is another module which load balances based on the dynamic metrics of the server and system resources. So that is supported in HA. So you will not see these in full. And if you want everything full, default, and HA capabilities in a single profile, then you can go for full HA. It combines full enterprise edition application features and clustering features. So when you are using full HA, you should have very good system resources, I mean infrastructure, because when you enable all the features, all the subsystems are loaded when you start the servers, right? So if there are multiple servers, all needs the system resources. So you should have a very good configuration uh, about the system resources when you use full HA, right? So these profiles are defined in domain.xml. Why? These are global. When you are applying anything on server groups, those settings are defined in the domain.xml so that the configuration is pushed to the slaves and it will be applied to the servers on the slave nodes. And you will define the profile definition in domain.xml, actual subsystems and getting and settings loaded internally. Okay, actual subsystems, when you define full HA or full HA, so based on this profile definition in domain.xml, internally Jboss will load all the respective settings and subsystems required for type of profile. Right? So we are clear, right, about the profiles?
Yes, but my question
Yeah.
is, what is that profile features? Infinity span, J grouping, and
Yes.
that feature,
Correct.
how to use it?
Yeah, we can. We need to enable these features, right?
Okay,
When
but
you define HA, when you define HA, this one already will be there. So let us see here.
no, no. My question is, why the feature? Why use the feature? That feature क्यों use करते हैं वो ऐसा?
अच्छा, अच्छा, uses of these features.
हाँ हाँ हाँ.
Okay. So infinite span. Let me tell you here. Let me add up infinite span. So this is for session replication and application or response caching. Matlab, yeah, actually we will do this configuration later, but I'll give you an overview. So usually क्या होता है, session replication. You know, session replication, it is highly used in high availability environments. So suppose I have logged into my account, okay, let us say Amazon account, and my request has gone to one server and that server failed. So should I get error or not?
You will get error.
Error, yes. So in order to avoid that, you will use session replication. So in the backend, my session that I am engaged with a server, my request is getting executed by a server. So all these requests sessions copy will be saved with and shared across other servers also when you enable session replication. So if the server that my request is executing is failed, then instantly the other server will have a copy of all the sessions and it will take over my request and it will execute, so that as a user I don't get any error. I should continue accessing the application, right? So that is session replication. So in session replication concept, there is session affinity, there is session persistence, there is session sticky sessions. All right, so we will discuss all these in session management. So that session management is implemented with the help of infinite span. So the same concept in WebSphere, it is dynamic cache in WebSphere, and in WebLogic it is coherence. So in all the application servers, this is a common concept for high availability. तो इसका मतलब क्या है high availability? You have to maintain your application highly available to the users. So how do you achieve high availability? With the help of these things and the architecture clustering. So when you work on clusters, the cluster members use J groups. What is J groups? It is a communication mode. And mod cluster, just like how we use mod JK for load balancing and failover mechanism, mod cluster is also one type of module that is used for high availability. So all these in Jboss features for high availability. Correct? Clear now?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
You will give the example, na? Why
Yes,
we
yes,
will
we will do
configure it.
practical. We will do practical.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So J groups
Okay.
and mod cluster also we will do. We have already done mod JK here, right? On standalone, we have done mod
Right.
JK. So in the same way,
But
we will
my
do.
question is, another
Yeah.
question was, there is a, in Apache,
Mm-hmm.
there is a virtual host.
Okay.
So that virtual host, in my another setup now, there is a virtual host like for different, मतलब अलग अलग application के लिए virtual host है.
Mm-hmm.
So virtual host है for by first is 443. Then
Okay.
it's go for 10,009 and something, and another one is 10,543 or 443.
Okay.
ऐसा है तो उसमें कंफ्यूजन है वो वर्चुअल होस्ट ऐसा इतना आया कैसे और वो अलग अलग यूज क्यों किया है
Mm-hmm.
ये मेरा क्वेश्चन है
So
क्योंकि
in
मैंने अभी जितना भी देखा था तो ओनली एक ही वर्चुअल होस्ट होता था पर यहाँ
okay.
3 या 2 मिनिमम थे.
हाँ दे सकते हैं, मल्टीपल दे सकते हैं. क्यों दे सकते हैं? Because your Apache is a client-facing server and it has to route the request to multiple applications. So multiple applications को route करना है तो multiple virtual hosts define करेंगे आप. Or else एक ही server को, if you want to portray your single server as multiple servers, okay, I will do what I'll do. I can add in my hosts.xml or host.config or conf file. I can give like what uh, creditcard.com, and I can give debitcard.com, and I can give savings.com. So all these three having a single IP, 192.168.254.132. I can configure like this. In my Linux host.conf file, for one IP, I can map multiple host names. So these, whenever your request goes to Apache, Apache's uh, configuration file. What is the configuration file? httpd.conf. In this conf, you will define virtual host. Right? In this virtual host, you can define one application slash credit card, and it will go to creditcard.com. You will define further parameters here, which is mapped to this one. Okay, another virtual host you will define for debit card application. Same, the server name will be debitcard.com and it will go to the same IP. So this is IP based virtual host, and you can configure name based virtual host also. I'll explain you when we get to Apache once again. So earlier we have discussed about Apache, right? Where is it? Yeah. So here we discussed about Apache. Again, we will come to Apache once we are done with domain mode and master slave configuration. We will do mod JK and we will do mod cluster both. So at that time, we will discuss these things. Alright, how Apache
Okay.
works, what is virtual hosting, and what are these parameters contain, how the application, how the request will be forwarded based on the IP and based on the host name or fully qualified domain name. So there is one more thing called FQDN, fully qualified domain name. So we will understand the difference between host name fully qualified domain name, server name, and what is domain name, and what is common name. So these are the few things that always give you confusion. So we will clear all this confusion in a single class when we discuss about Apache Advanced in next few days. Correct?
Okay, okay.
Fine. So coming back to our topic, subsystems in each profile. Okay. So if you define default, these are all the subsystems that will be loaded. Which subsystems? In default, it will load JNDI for JDBC and other like Enterprise Edition EJBs you are using. It is actually an API, Java Naming Directory Interface. Enterprise Edition EJBs, yeah, this is EJB. So these subsystems will be loaded. Undertow, yes, it will be loaded. But default, it will not support JMS, batch, clustering, InfySpan, JGroups, and mod cluster. Alright. So these subsystems will not be loaded if you use default profile. And now full. Okay. In full, clustering, InfySpan, JGroups, and mod cluster. Why? Because it is not for high availability. It is for full enterprise edition application support. So that's why all these subsystems are loaded. High availability, if your application does not have JMS, then you can use high availability. It will support all the clustering concepts along with Undertow and enterprise edition, enterprise EJVs and JNDI. Full HA, all the subsystems will be loaded. So whenever someone asks you about the differences, you can tell them these are the differences, right? So your profile needs a socket binding group. Why? Yes. In HA, these are the subsystems loaded, right? So for each subsystem, there will be some sockets socket bindings required. For example, for cluster communication, JGroups is used, right? Clustering, the messaging will happen. We will discuss this in clustering. Okay. So what exactly is the socket binding group? It defines about the network ports used by the server. So how the server uses the network ports? Your server will get the ports applied by the type of profile on server groups. Your server belongs to a server group, and your server group will be mapped with the profile, and your profile contains all these subsystems. So each subsystem here we have discussed has a different set of port numbers. So you can have multiple socket bindings like standard sockets, HA sockets, full HA sockets. Okay, it is just like your profile name. If you define HA profile, you need to use a socket binding group as HA socket. Why? Because it will use different ports for clustering, internal communication, right? For example, in domain.xml, there is a group and this is full HA. In the same thing, same file, the socket binding group name to be will be defined and its interface. We will understand what is an interface, and it contains the socket binding name. HTTP, HTTPS, you see here, JGroups, TCP. So full HA means full HA, JGroup is loaded. JGroups subsystem is loaded. So JGroups, what is it? It is used for cluster communication and it uses this port number. So if you define default, this socket binding name will not be available. Alright. So based on the type of profile you define in the domain.xml, the template will be applied for the server groups, and your server group will have the profile type defined with the name, and the same socket binding group will be attached, and based on the profile and the socket binding name, socket binding group name, the ports will be loaded. Alright. So in once you define this one in the domain.xml, what the profile and the socket group, the socket binding group in each server, means Linux server host.xml maps a socket group. It will have a reference, right? So we have seen here server groups contain servers. So in host.xml you will have the server name mapped with the server group, which is referenced here, main server group, right? And socket bindings. Socket bindings will have a reference of socket binding group, which is this one. So basically your host.xml is inheriting the settings from domain.xml. So full HA sockets. Socket binding group is full HA sockets from here. So all the ports, default ports are defined. So you will not use the default ports to avoid port conflicts. So you will give port offset. By default it will be 0. You will give whatever is feasible. So when you give 50, 50 is added to each port here, to each default port. Why? I can define one more server here. Correct? I can define one more server like this. I name it as server 2. What happens if port offset is 0 and socket binding group HA sockets, both the servers will use same port numbers, port conflicts. So that is why you give 50 and you can give 60, whatever, other than 50. You can give 51, you can give 100. So on the same host.xml, means same Linux server, there are two servers that belongs to one server group with different port numbers, and it is using this socket binding group mapped here, and your both the servers will get the starting port number from here, and it will add 100, and it will get the starting port which is HTTP. This server will add 50. So 8130 and 8180 as HTTP port number. Okay, so this is how the host controller of your slave gets the configuration from the domain.xml, which is global, and it will apply to the servers. And when you start the server, it will load the socket bindings and it will inherit the sockets from here, and your main server group is already bound to this profile. So this profile will load full HA, means it will load all these subsystems. Clear?
Yes, sir.
So you can use port offset to prevent conflicts when running multiple servers on the same machine. So how it works? So step by step we will see. First you will define the profile where domain.xml. A profile name full HA is defined with the desired subsystems. Okay, full HA means it will load all these subsystems, and you always have an option to disable any subsystem you want. For example, you don't want JMS, you can delete from domain.xml the entire subsystem. So this acts as a blueprint when you define a profile in domain.xml. That is the main thing for all the servers and all the environment in your domain node. It is a blueprint. So it is a guidelines. Now, second thing is you will create a server group. Okay, let us create uh, my server group. Okay, assign this profile to server group. Which profile? This profile. Add it. So I am defining a server group, custom server group, my own server group. Name is my server group, and I am telling my server group to use this template as profile, full HA. Okay, done. So domain.xml, we have defined the profile, and we are telling the server group to use this profile. Why we are telling the server group name, the server group? Because your domain.xml can contain multiple server groups, correct? So you have to define your server group, and you have to enforce the server group to use which profile. And third step, define socket binding groups. Okay, we have seen what is socket binding group. So socket binding group, it is a collection of ports for services, HTTP, HTTPS clustering, management. These all are defined under a socket binding group. So your server needs all these. So socket binding group, based on the type of profile, you will give the name. For it will be easy. Fourth step, you will go to host controller. So these all first three steps are done on domain.xml. Now you will go to host controller configuration, which is host.xml. Actual servers are created and assigned in the host.xml. Why? Because always domain controller will be on a separate host, separate node, or separate machine or server, whatever you can call. The actual servers where you deploy the applications are created and defined under host.xml. So servers are created and assigned where it needs a server group, a socket binding group, and a port offset. If I require port offset to avoid conflicts, I will use port offset. So these are the three main things that are required to be added in the host.xml. So my server group, I will give the reference in host.xml, my server group. So my server group and a socket binding group which points to the same socket binding group that we have defined here, and port offset. Okay, we have seen here the port offset. You will define the servers like this in host.xml. Now fifth point, the host controller starts the servers based on the configuration. Which configuration? This configuration from host.xml, and your host controller, once it loads all these with these references, it will contact domain controller and inherit the subsystems, the configuration, everything. So each server inherits profile from server group, socket ports from socket binding groups, and applications from deployments under server group. So in yesterday's class we have deployed application and on the server group. So it will inherit the deployments from the server group. If I deploy an application on my server group, when you start the server, your host controller will get the application from the my server group, and it will load all the required subsystems from the profile you have defined. So this is a profile. And what are the subsystems? These are all the subsystems. So when you start a server, all these things happen in the background. This is server boot up, or you can call server startup. So that is why whenever you start a server, it will check all these, it will validate all these. If any of the subsystem is failed, then your server will not start. So in the interviews, this question is asked mostly. What may be the reason my Jboss server instance is failing? It is not starting up. What are the different reasons? So there may be many reasons. There may be socket binding issue. There may be misconfiguration in the server group, or any subsystems are not loaded, right? Under subsystems, there are thread pools not created, security settings not properly mapped, authentication and authorization errors. So many things, right? Now, the same things, whatever we have discussed here, it is domain mode. So when it comes to standalone mode, there are, we can call it profile type. So standalone.xml, core enterprise feature. HA adds clustering. Full adds full enterprise features. Full HA, full enterprise and clustering. So just same, right? So this is in standalone mode. So in standalone mode, the profile is fixed by the XML, the type of XML. So if you start the standalone server -c means which configuration you want to load, which configuration file you want to load, you want to use it to start your Jboss instance, standalone instance. You will define this one, right? So you define the subsystems, socket bindings, data sources, and etc. everything directly in this file. But in domain mode, you will define everything in the domain.xml file, right? So this is a process. So example use cases. Okay, if you are using lightweight microservices, if you are working on microservices, then you can use default profile for lightweighted, which can use very less footprint, and full for enterprise applications using JMS and BAC. HA, stateless service with clustering, and full HA, stateful applications, session replication, and full enterprise. So we will see what is this stateless and stateful when we talk about session replication. Okay, normal common ports. HTTP 8080 for HTTP traffic used to access applications. HTTPS for accessing applications over secure protocol to enforce encrypted communication. Management HTTP, admin console, management via HTTP, which is 9990. J groups for cluster communication, it is 7600. Mod cluster 8888 for mod cluster listener. So these are the common ports. Now there is one more concept called interface. Right. We have seen in the configuration files in standalone, in domain.xml, It's host slave, host master, host.xml interface. So in Jboss, interfaces define named IP bindings for server.